Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Riskologists. As always, I'm your host, Pat Bradshaw, and today joined by a really special guest, and that's Chantelle Morrissette. Chantelle, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invite.
No problem. The pleasure's all ours. I think, as always, Chantelle, a logical place to start with these things, just to give everyone a bit of context, is a little bit of a journey to date, really. So how you got into risk management, a bit of a timeline of your career, and which led you all the way up to this very point recording this podcast. So fire away.
So the journey started in the years 2000. Me in university studying industrial engineering, and I really liked that one because it was a mix of engineering and business. And that led me to do some consulting for government and private entities, mostly in process optimization. It was at the beginning.
Okay.
And that led me to the mining industry, actually. Very, very interesting industry. I learned a lot there. And then I went on to project management. And I started with the more commercial side of things, contracts, outsourcing. Also, and there I had a really strong curiosity of how what I do impacts the objective, how the shaping of the contract of the deal will impact us achieving the objectives, meaning them doing what they are supposed to do, doing on time, no litigation, no claims, pay them on time, happy story for both parties.
Yeah.
And on that journey, I discovered, okay, yes, there's many things that in the commercial and engineering side will determine that there is less likelihood for us to be in trouble. And that's, for me, that's kind of where this curiosity for risk management started, because I didn't want to get in those troubles of having to deal with a claim.
Yeah.
And then the opportunity appeared. I mean, I did my MBA, and I went a bit on business development. And then there was a position available for risk management, and I took it, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the rest, as they say.
My training, and the rest is history. And of course, the optimization process part also helped. Everything fell into place. Yes, I love it. And then I continue reading and understanding more about facilitation and the people side of things as well. So that's the journey today.
Amazing.
But also, thanks to the project management part, I had the beautiful opportunity to work in different countries. So in Canada, Peru, Dominican Republic, and the UK.
I've spoken, a couple of the guests I've spoken to have sort of risk management's led them all over the world. And I must admit, I'm really passionate about travel. So I think it's an amazing opportunity, not just an amazing career, but it can lead you to all corners of the world. Like you mentioned, one of the optimized partners, Paul Disley, we had on recently, he's been from doing like gold mines in Chile to the Petronas Towers in Malaysia. It's really is an amazing opportunity, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And also how this big project changes the culture, the local culture. So, for example, in Dominican Republic, I remember when we started there, we saw people in motorbikes that the headlight wasn't working, that they were carrying a whole bunch of things, that at night you have a hard time to see them. And then 3 years down the road, they are wearing a safety vest, their headlight is working, and it's not people that work with us, but they are part of the community. So, you influence the community.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important that risk management has a huge part to play in, like you say, not just influencing the community, but how particular projects might interact with the local community. And if you're going into these developing countries to, I don't know, do like a mining project or something, that you've got to act responsibly, and it can be quite easy to, especially in olden times, to just sort of exploit that. But I think risk management has played a huge part in changing that for the better as well.
Yes.
Okay, I forgot to mention actually, Chantelle, I think you're the first guest I've had on the podcast that's come from a different time zone. So that's a first for us. Where are you joining from this morning? Sorry.
Montreal, Canada.
Is that where you're from originally?
Yes.
to be honest, most people I've spoken to so far have been UK based, but we've got a few guests lined up who are overseas. The first person to take that title. So as everyone can probably tell from the title of the podcast today, we're talking around something really interesting, which is the myths around risk management. So I think this episode will be really interesting for not just risk professionals, but also people who have a close relationship with risk management, but don't necessarily work exclusively with it as their day job. So hopefully this will either debunk some of the things or the misconceptions that they have, or will at least raise a bit of thought. Just before we jump into that, Chantelle, I think it'd be a good place to start is, I guess, just defining risk management. So from your perspective, whether it's obviously your own interpretation or a bit of a boilerplate definition, what is risk management?
Yeah, so I will try to avoid the boilerplate one. And I will say that, first of all, it's a discipline. Yeah. Like I have seen organizations that they do it once, like, okay, we have a risk register. How long ago have you done it? 2 years ago. It just says you're not doing risk management. You have a delusion of doing risk management. Yeah. So that's the first part. That is a discipline, and even once a year is not enough, in my humble opinion. Yeah. It protects the company objectives. That's why you do it. You want to protect the company, the organization, the project you're working on, and you try to manage uncertainty. This, like, it may or may not happen. It could have positive or negative effects, because that's what happened in real life. You have events that are curveballs that are thrown at you, and sometimes, in few instances, you're not even sure if it will be good or bad. Yeah, like a change in law. Initially, you think, oh, it will be really bad, but then when you analyze it properly, you come to the conclusion, maybe it will be positive. So that's where risk management comes in, managing uncertainty.
I think a question, apologies, it's a little bit off the cuff, that I'd be interested to hear your answer to is, I don't struggle with so much of it anymore, but if I'm, say, for example, out for drinks with friends or something, and they say, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that question? How do you put it in layman's terms to friends and family when they say, what do you do for work?
Actually, I do say risk management.
Yeah, I think the way I always try and say, because I say risk management, I think everybody automatically thinks health and safety. So like you say, I always say planning for success, or if someone's spending a lot of money on something, we tell them what could go wrong. So jumping straight into the myths then, Chantelle. So what would you say throughout your career you found to be the most common myths the general public might have with risk management?
I think the fact that when you say risk management, the mind goes to the image of somebody close in an office with lots of paper, a cup of coffee, and doing numbers, a very analytical person, a very isolated person that looks at the statistics on its own. And I find that is quite far from reality. Yeah. And I do understand where that came from, because originally risk management was the actuaries and mostly around the insurance company, to try to, and in this case, they really need to nail what is the likelihood and what will be the consequences. However, risk management has moved, and even if there is still a group portion of risk management that works for the insurance companies and their main job is to do that part, it's just a little section of the whole industry. And I will say that most risk managers is quite the opposite. It's people who are talking with as many people as they can, that they have an immense curiosity. Yes, they still have to have analytical skills. Yes, they still have to sit on the computer and do models to understand uncertainty. But that's just a part of it. It's not the main part. And I remember, I see risk management now more as an orchestrator. Okay. Somebody who will put together a team and define, okay, you will do, it's not that the risk person will define who does what, but it will ask the questions, and by asking the question, the team will define who will do what by when. Yeah. And orchestrate out that effort. And I remember once I have workshops, and also I have risk reviews with the risk owners or the risk action owners. And I try to do it as interesting as possible. And I remember once somebody told me, you know what, telling you everything that's going on and all my worries about the uncertainty around everything, I feel like I'm more light today. I feel like almost like if I went to therapy.
I've had that a couple of times, funnily enough, actually. I'd be quite interested to hear from your perspective, Chantelle. Obviously, I know sort of said a lot, it's a common misconception that risk specialists or risk professionals can be quite antisocial, and like you say, quite analytical and but perhaps a little bit introverted. Have you met many risk professionals in your career that they may solely focus on some modeling aspects and stuff, or have you met many good risk professionals who have had that personality, who have just been introverts? Because from my experience, I think to be a completely fully sculpted risk professional, the human factor is so important, probably arguably the most important. But I guess I'd just be interested to hear if you've met many risk professionals who have managed to carve a career with that sort of personality, slightly introverted.
You can still do, definitely, but I think it depends on what you do and where you do it, and if you are part of a team or if you are the sole risk representative in your organization. Yeah, so I will say it depends on that. And again, I said there is still a space for people that have a stronger suit around analytical and modeling and things like that. It's just like it's not the single only option. And as far as my experience goes, that percentage of people with the less social skills, it's shrinking.
The reason I ask that question is I know there's some organizations who will silo it into, they'll have a department where you literally just have a group of risk modelers who just sit in a maybe in a dark room just modeling day in, day out, and they don't really have to interact with that many people. So I didn't know if that was something you'd come across before, if you think
I think it's mostly in the insurance companies, and but then on day-to-day organizations, not that much, because the challenge is how you get the data. And that's where also probably risk management has potential to fail, because if you have somebody that will not interact with others, they will not be fully aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And therefore your model may be lacking of things. You may be precise on a specific risk. What is the risk of rain, for example?
Yeah.
And might be very precise on what's the likelihood and what will be the impacts. But they didn't know about the risk of the fact that now there is shortage of, just as an example, tires, because they're not necessarily in tune with the rest of the team, whereas somebody in logistics may be aware of that, but they haven't been able to communicate that to the risk management program.
Like you say, it's a danger of silos in some instances, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thanks, Chantelle. So just moving into a common myth that when we were sort of initially planning this episode, and something that sort of came to mind that I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on as a common myth, really, is as a statement more than anything, being the risk manager is the person that manages the risk. So I'm sure that's something that yourself and any of the risk professionals who are listening at the moment will have come across at some point. Be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, like there's this conception or expectation in many instances that, oh, you are the risk manager, perfect. So tell me, what are the risks? So tell me what I need to do. What are you going to do about this? I was like, no, you tell me what are the risks. So our endeavors is to create an environment or create opportunities or ask questions that will allow the team to share. Okay, this is, or even to be aware of, actually, yes, this is potential risk. Okay, yes, I was, okay. They're joining the dots in their minds and in the organization. And then, yes, to ask, okay, if we have the risk of shortage of tires, again, I'm asking, why? What are the causes? What will be the immediate consequences? And then tackle all of those elements. And then the team will decide who is going to do what by when. And we will, again, orchestrate.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I'm obviously relatively, well, I say relatively new into my career of risk management, 12 months in, and it's not something that I've encountered personally yet, but having spoken to a couple of the optimized partners, they were really keen to hear your thoughts on that, because it's like, well, your job title is risk manager, so why are you not managing the risks? Such a misconception that I think it's important to address.
No, but on that point, yes, we are managing it, but we're not responsible for it, and we will not come alone with the answer. And I think that's where, and that's why I find that this topic is very important, because going back to one of the first questions about what's the first misconception of having the person alone, that's where that misconception comes of risk manager, meaning you will be responsible and able to manage everything on your own, due to that myth.
Okay, cool. So moving into the next point, Chantelle. So in terms of risk management, some people may have had experience with it where risk management is also a bit like the party poopers, almost the party stoppers, whether that's from previous experience with risk management, or if that's just the general preconceived conception about it. How would you like to sort of debunk that one, that risk managers are the party poopers?
Yes. So I think that one comes from misconceptions, risk. Ooh. That, and then, risk managers, they will tell me not to do X, right? Because automatically you think of risk management and you're thinking about avoiding risks. But a proper risk manager will not necessarily say, not be an overprotecting parent. They will say, no, don't go out, don't breathe, don't eat, don't drink, don't take a shower. There's 0.1111% of...
wraps in bubble wrap, basically.
Yes. No, it's quite the opposite. And then I have seen some people that see risk managers and say, what? This person takes some risk as well in their personal life. And it's all about taking calculated risks. What is the gain? And then if we understand as an organization what could go wrong, and if we can do something about it and decrease the chances, why not go for it, right? But that's a misconception, and also because in a point, risk management in organizations started with compliance-based standards. You need to do that, you need to do that, you need to do that.
Tick box, basically, isn't it? Yeah.
So I think that's where it started, but the current version of risk management is quite the opposite, is to empower the organization to pursue. Of course, sometimes depending on the risk appetite, that's the key part, is to define what's the risk appetite of the organization.
I think for me, and I was guilty of it when I first started my career, is risk is always affiliated with threat. I think it's just a preconceived that it's a threat, risk is bad, when obviously opportunities as well is such a huge part of our job, is exploiting opportunities and making the most of those and exposing those. And I must admit, early on in my career, it took me a long time, when going through hypothetical situations and go through my training, that I'd just literally be identifying threat, and neglect the opportunities completely. And I think that's probably, if I can do that, then that's probably a trap that a lot of people can fall into, that might be quite immature in their organization from where risk management's concerned. So that's really fascinating, Chantelle. So just moving on to a point that I guess I'd be quite interested to hear your thoughts on, really. So we mentioned compliance a second ago, like a little bit of a box ticking, inverted commas, exercise. And my next point really is around the sort of blind compliance versus intelligent application. So I think there's a perception, or perhaps a misconception or a myth, tying into the theme, that a company or an organization that has or thinks that they have strong corporate governance and a robust internal control environment, and that protects them against most of the risks they face on a daily basis. So, for example, follow the procedures to the letter of the law and it will protect you. However, obviously things change. The amount of effort it takes to manage a particular risk is proportionate, depending on its potential impact, which obviously differs in different circumstances. So I guess there's a couple of points to this question, really. So firstly, have you ever experienced this where people don't try and understand what the starting position is in applying risk management in its traditional application, and maybe leaning on this blind compliance piece?
Yes, I think it's very tempting, because it's much easier to do the compliance based. No doubt, it's easier. You quickly show, okay, this is the value. Everybody's going to do that. I don't have to talk to people, for those that have challenges with that. And you don't have to update the risk register or your risk understanding in such a frequent way. But unfortunately, that's where the party stopper reputation comes in.
Yeah.
Because, I have to agree with them. When it's blind compliance, unfortunately, we are not, most of the times we're not helping the company because things change.
Do you have any examples where you may have come across that in your career, or even just in your daily life at all?
Yes, actually, and I call it the risk management going wrong, but I have two examples. Now I came to mind another one.
Oh, amazing.
The first one is a personal one. I do remember in one point in my life, I was in between jobs. And when you have time, what you can do is do some online buying, right?
Yeah.
But me be doing risk management, I thought, you know what, I want to maximize my money and I don't want to change my Canadian dollars in US with the change that the credit card or the bank will give me, because most of the time it's terrible, especially because I have US dollars already changed. So I went to the bank to ask for a credit card and my intention was to use it online. And so I don't have to do any kind of transaction in Canadian dollars. I can use it in US to US. And they tell me, okay, well, they check my files, but right now you're not employed full time. No, I'm not. But have you seen my bank account? Give me a $500 credit card. I give you the $500. I give you $1,000. I just need an instrument, a tool that I find that credit cards are better than debit cards to use online, right?
Yeah.
At least that's my analysis. And no, she was like, no. Can I talk to your supervisor? No, that's the rule. That's what risk management somewhere in the financial institution came about. If you are an employee, you are not worthy of credit. But I have so much assets, I don't really need credit.
It's such a perfect example of blind compliance, isn't it? Computer says no.
Computer says no.
Exactly.
And my second example, and I laughed so hard when I watched that movie, the latest Johnny English movie.
Oh, okay. I think I've watched the first one years and years when I was a kid, but I've not seen the most recent one.
So the most recent one, they call John English out of retirement, and he asked for a gun, and everybody looks like, oh no, nowadays we don't use guns, but okay, we will give you a gun. And the guy, before giving him the gun, looks into his iPad. Okay, but before I give you the gun, I need to complete with these forms around safety, and I need to inform you that this could cause bodily harm. Duh. So risk management going wrong on going too far, that is ridicule.
Exactly, yeah, and I think people will empathise that. It doesn't have to be something that you've encountered in the day job with risk management. I think it's a good example, like you say, with the bank example and the film example. It's like when you're speaking to someone, it's like they've literally got a piece of paper and they can't divert off it. They've got a script that they can stick to, and that's it. It's blind compliance. The intelligent application would look in your example that you've got assets, and as a matter of fact, yeah, of course you can have a credit card. I think the analogy is quite important, because I think risk management, if it's used incorrectly, like you say, in some organizations, will have that same level of frustration. I guess from a changing of that mindset, then, if you were to go into a particular organization that had maybe this slightly archaic blind compliance level of risk management, do you have any thoughts on how to combat that?
Yeah, well, I will say it's about developing the risk management culture.
Yes.
And now it's hard, and I do understand that sometimes this kind of compliance, there needs to be a section of compliance, because unfortunately I found that common sense is not common anymore.
So true.
Yes, but you need to have avenues to, let's say an example of the bank, to be able to escalate to somebody else that will have the discernment
Yes.
to analyze the situation differently. So that's one of the solutions. But then on the risk management culture, I will say having these workshops, which are quote unquote time consuming, but it helps the team shape their way of thinking. Okay, what is the event? What are the potential causes? What are the potential consequences? And I see many organizations that they try to avoid going through that because it seems troublesome to detail all the potential causes of an event. But it gives you so much material to properly address a risk, because then you say, okay, what can I do to limit the likelihood of this cause? I can do this, and that. Then what about this? What about this? So when we have a detailed cause and consequence analysis, then doing something about it is quite easy and effective.
Yes.
And then through going through that exercise over and over again, as somebody that is part of the organization, you have the mindset. And then you say, okay, so why we have, then in the case of the bank, the person will say, okay, so why we ask people to have to be employed, because that way we know that they have an income, and because they have an income, they will be able to service their debt. Okay, but if the person, so the whole objective is to be able to service the debt. Yes, this person has so many assets, they will be able to service the debt. They don't need employment. So that's where you help the organization develop the risk management mindset.
100%. Yeah, I think a lot of the time it comes down to the culture and attitudes, doesn't it? And again, a little adage that has been drilled into me since I started is context is king. Risk management is very subjective. It's that it can't be a blanket objective view on how to look at things, because then, like you say, you end up with these just doing risk management badly, as you said.
Yeah, or like I sometimes ask people just in a conversation, water is good or bad? And most people say it's good, it's good. And what about in a flood? You still think that water is good?
Yeah, that's such a good example. Context is king is something that's really been pushed into me, and a lot of the times when I've sort of asked questions when I'm when I'm going through my training, and 9 times out of 10 it comes down to it all depends on the context. All depends on the context. So yeah, no, thanks for that, Chantelle. Just moving on to the last point, really. So you mentioned in the previous point before, apologies, went off piste a little bit around potential efficiencies not being achieved. Did you want to go into a little bit more detail around that?
Yeah, and also I have a point that I wanted to mention. Risk management also, I have seen that is quite focused on cost and a schedule.
Yes.
Like, let's say we need to keep this project needs to be on time and on schedule, which is great. But I think the next step for risk management to really influence the organization is to include other dimensions like safety, quality, reputation. Because what I have seen is, like, if you don't take those criteria, have something to analyze and to assess a risk, then they could be risks that have low cost impact and lower schedule impact, but has a tremendous reputational impact. So they might be dismissed. They will be dismissed by the system because you will say, well, if it has low cost, low schedule, it's not a high priority risk, where it could be a high priority risk.
Yeah, definitely. I think we touched on this a couple of times leading up to recording, didn't we, Chantelle? The world beyond cost and schedule. I mean, in terms of obviously underpinning those sort of impacts, then obviously like reputation and things like that, do you think that would solely be qualitative approaches that would sort of lead to that sort of conclusion, really?
Yeah, yes, correct. Or semi-quantitative. So what I would like is to have analysis or an assessment on risk on different dimensions, even if they don't have a number value. And then when it does have a high cost and a schedule impact, then we go into the full quantitative analysis. And
no, that's a really good point. I mean, from other sort of potential efficiencies not being achieved, did you have any other examples there at all?
Yeah, for example, to really focus on finding the true root cause. And that again is going back on why it's important to really analyze what are all the potential causes that you can think of. That could be a very exhaustive exercise, but it does bring a lot of benefits and efficiency. Seems inefficient to put time into go into the causes, but that's where the jewels are.
Yeah.
There's also the importance of understanding I know everybody talks about, let's identify and let's manage our stakeholders. But one thing is to talk about it, another one is to really do it. And I have seen in many instances where you have major projects or companies even, and they think about the immediate customer. Then in the case of projects, it will be most of the time governments. And they give you a set of expectations. Okay, this is what we want the project to do.
Yes.
And we want the parks that are around the area looking like this. We want Wi-Fi on the train. We want this, we want that. And at the time that you are about to finish the project, you say, no, we cannot open the line because there's no Wi-Fi. But if you were aware of all the stakeholders, you will remember that the ultimate customer, the user, what is their priorities? And maybe the user will prefer open the line. Wi-Fi can come 6 months later.
Yes.
But it will really make a big difference in my journey, in my life, to be able to use this new line. So we tend to forget about the ultimate stakeholder, the user.
Yeah.
And when we evaluate risks as well and opportunities, to have them in mind. So that makes it more efficient, because they could be things that we consider to be important, but are not important for the ultimate user.
Yeah.
And therefore, some money could be saved, or we can save time by not necessarily golden plated. That's the other thing. Sometimes some project, they will have a lot of requirements that are not necessarily needed. And therefore it takes longer, it costs more, and then it doesn't bring the value for the ultimate user.
I think we touched on a few of those throughout, didn't we, around like culture and stakeholders and all those sort of things. And no, it's fascinating to hear your input around them, because I'd be interested to see what everybody else, when you have a chance to listen to this, will think, and if we've missed any, or if anyone would expand on any. But thank you, Chantelle, and hopefully we've debunked a few people listening who may have had some misconceptions about risk management. So as I always do to round these things off, Chantelle, I think a good place to finish really is just to ask you to give us, or give yourself even, a little bit of advice. So if you could have given yourself a piece of advice around your career in risk management that you know now that you didn't know then, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, I think to have a lot of patience. And why? Because there's still a lot of people, stakeholders, organizations that have preconceived ideas, just as the one that we have discussed. So it used to drain me to have to explain again. So what does risk management do? No, don't worry. It won't be boring. My workshop won't be boring. Yes, we need to review it every month. No, 6 months is not acceptable.
Yeah.
Or things like that. And I think is to have a lot of patience, understanding, and continue persistence, and focus on the supporters and not on the naysayers. I think that will be, because when I focus on the supporters and I focus on what did work, it's so much easier. And then again, going back to the TV culture, at least when I was a child, there was a program called Turn the Cat.
I know of it.
Yes. And one of my bosses used to say, and it always remained in my mind, sight beyond sight, right? And I think that's risk management, sight beyond sight.
Love that. Absolutely love that. I think it's a great place to finish. Just touching on your last point there, sorry, Chantelle. So when you said sort of focus your efforts on the supporters, do you mean people in the organization who might be a bit of an ally to you, and people focus your support, your efforts on them, and like you say, the resistance from the other people will hopefully start to thaw out if you've got somebody on side.
Yeah, and when they see the results and when they see, okay, this is working, and actually, oh, I hear good comments, about these workshops. Okay, let me come along and let me try it. But yeah, it comes with time.
Well, thanks so much for that, Chantelle. Really, really appreciate it. It's been a fascinating discussion. And just very last point from me. So if anybody listening today would love to get in touch with you to sort of pick your brains on anything around the topic we discussed today, or sort of engage in a discussion, what would be the best way for them to get hold of you?
LinkedIn.
Good stuff. I'll put a link to your LinkedIn page in the podcast notes in case anyone can't find Chantelle on LinkedIn. But yeah, other than that, Chantelle, thanks so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully our listeners have enjoyed it as well. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much as well.
No worries. Thanks, Chantelle. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.